Well, today the topic has been how to gain control over our emotions. It is very important to know that emotion is what makes us animals. There is an ancient sloka, or coming from the Indian Hindu literature. Ahara nidra bhaya maitunancha samanya metat pasubih naranam dharmo hitesa maliko viseso dharmena hina pasubih samana. What that means is taking in food. Ahar means taking in food. Nidra, sleeping. Bhaya, fears. Maituna, sexual activities. These are things that human beings have in common with animals. Ahara nidra bhaya maitunancha samanya metat pasabik samana dharmo hitesa madiko viseso. What is special about the human being is this ability to think and reason out. That is the meaning of dharma. Dharma means the thoughts we think. Dharma can be bad or good. Bad dharma is called akusala dharma. Good dharma is called kusala dharma. So dharma is simply the thoughts we think. What is special about the human being is this ability to think and reason out. When we think of the human mind, we normally think that just mind is just one thing different from the body. It's not like that. When the Buddha spoke about the mind, he spoke about three parts, three actions, three activities of the body. Mind is not an entity, it is an activity. So these three activities is what we refer to as mind. These three activities are really, in modern terminology or modern language, if we speak about these activities, first is the activity of perception. Perception means the activity of our senses. We have 5 senses: the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body. With the eye we see, with the ears we hear, the nose we smell. So, what the Buddha called vijnana is perception. Eye perception, chakku vijnana. Ear perception, sota vijnana. Nose perception, gana vijnana. Tongue perception, jivha vijnana. body perception, the perception of touch, kaya vijnana. So the word vijnana is perception, but today it is translated as consciousness. Perception is not consciousness. These are two different things. But this is one activity that we refer to as the mind. But all this data received through the different senses is carried to the brain, and the brain begins to think and reason out and give meaning to what we see or hear or smell or taste or touch. We interpret what we perceive through the senses. And that activity of interpretation, Buddha called mano. Mano. And then, of course, from there, according to how we interpret, we are emotionally aroused. If one says something, and if you interpret that as an insult to you, you become angry. If you interpret that as a joke, you begin to laugh. Or if you interpret that as a threat, you become frightened and maybe run away. So you see, different things happen, different emotions are aroused according to the way we interpret. The emotional arousal is called chitta. That emotional part is really, chitta refers to what we normally call the mood. You can be in a good mood or in a bad mood. You can be in a calm mood or you can be in an excited mood. So that mood is the chitta. And according to the emotion that is aroused, we begin to act. And that action is what we call karma. What we call karma is the action. And then, according to the action, we also reap the consequences. And that consequences are called vipaka. So it is very important to understand this before we can even control our minds. We cannot control the mind in the proper way if we don't understand this. And this is what in modern language we say, we are organisms in an environment. The environment stimulates the organism through the senses. Just as you press a button and light comes on, the environment presses buttons. We have 5 buttons. The eyes, the ears, nose, tongue and the body. These are the buttons. So from the environment, if light comes to the eye, we see. If sounds come to the ears, we hear. If smells come to the nose, we begin to smell. If taste come to the tongue, we taste. A touch coming to the body, we feel the touch. So in this same way, We are like machines. You press a button and it works. So you see, when that happens, we are reacting without our knowledge. We are not doing things. They are happening to us. We are like automatic machines. So if these things are just happening to us and we are not doing things, how can we control these things? This is why the Buddha pointed out that we cannot control this unless we become conscious of these things. It is only by becoming conscious that we can gain control. And when we say we can gain control, who is that we? The only thing that we can call we is that consciousness itself. It is only by becoming conscious that consciousness can control this unconscious behavior. The normal behavior is unconscious. This is why the modern psychologists begin to use two words, conscious and the unconscious. So most of the time, we are behaving unconsciously. It is only when we become conscious that we can gain control over this. You know, recently some disastrous thing happened to some people who went to India, and they died. How did that happen? So we heard that what happened was that they were going in some vehicle and the driver of the vehicle fell asleep. So when the driver falls asleep, what happens? So in the same way, you see, we are having a part of our mind which becomes conscious. And that is that place called mano, the activity of the brain which does the thinking and the interpretation of what is seen or heard. And it is according to the way we interpret, according to the way we see it, that the emotion is aroused. So it is that thinking part which the Buddha called mano, which is the controlling part. And if that controlling part falls asleep, what happens? We begin to act unconsciously, just as what happened to those people who went to India. You see, this is the meaning of satipatthana, which is today translated as mindfulness. This is not just mindfulness, it is being awake instead of being asleep. We have to be awake all the time. as far as we are supposed to be awake. When we go to sleep, of course, we may be sleeping, but when we wake up, we should be really awake. But most of us, even when we are supposed to be awake, we are sleeping. Why? Because we are acting unconsciously. So it is only when we are able to be awake that we can gain control over our behavior. And to be awake is not simply to be able to see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Something more than just seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. To be awake is to become aware of what we are doing, what we are thinking, what we are feeling. In other words, we have to be aware of our reactions to what is going on. It is only by becoming aware of our reactions that we can gain control over our behavior. Now, in order to become aware of the reaction, we have to turn our minds inwards, not outwards. When our mind is turned outwards, we see something with our eyes and we begin to become aware of how we feel about it. It can be pleasant or it can be unpleasant. And if we begin to become aware of the pleasantness of something, the desire rises automatically. If we become aware of the unpleasantness of something, a hatred arises automatically. Now that desire and the hatred is simply that unconscious reaction. So if we want to stop that unconscious reaction, we have to become conscious of the reaction. If we become conscious only of the pleasantness or the unpleasantness, we will be unconsciously reacting. So instead of focusing our attention on what is going on outside, we should begin to focus our attention on what is going on inside, which is the reaction. So it is only by learning to become aware of our reactions all the time that we can gain control over the reaction. This is the meaning of satipatthana, which is normally called mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply becoming aware of what is going on outside. So it is the wrong word that we are using. It is not mindfulness, it is introspection. Introspection means looking at what is going on inside us, which is the reaction. So it is only by learning to become aware of our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. The thoughts, the speech, and the action. It is only by becoming aware of these reactions. They are not really actions, they are reactions. So we have to become aware of our reactions. It becomes an action only when we do it consciously. What is done unconsciously is a reaction. It is like if we throw a ball onto the wall, it will come back. That is a reaction. The wall is not throwing it to us, but the ball strikes the wall and it comes back. It is happening automatically. So in the same way, when we see something and it is pleasant, a desire arises. If it is unpleasant, a hatred arises. These are reactions. So what we call akusala, or the bad actions, is really a reaction, not an action. The good actions are the real actions. Now, if you go to a river, you enter a river, what happens? And you enter the river and you do nothing, what happens? The river, the current of the river will take you down the river. In the same way, a desire arises and you are carried away by the desire. Or anger arises and you are carried away by the anger. Or a fear arises and you are carried away by the fear. That is like getting into the current of the river. And your going down the river is not your action. It is just happening to you. But your action will be if you begin to swim against the current. If you begin to swim, that is your action. In the same way, when anger arises, if you begin to control the anger, that would be an action. When a desire arises, if you begin to control the desire, that would be an action. If you begin to fear and you begin to control the fear, that is an action. So the controlling of the emotion is the action. If you are carried away by the emotion, it is a reaction. So the action is conscious, the reaction is unconscious. So this is why it is so important to become conscious. Whenever a thought arises, now if you have been going to meditate, you will begin to realize that just thoughts come into your mind and you are carried away by the thought. That is, it is happening unconsciously. you become unconscious. The moment you are carried away by the thought, you are unconscious. You are not conscious. But the moment you become conscious, that thought stops. Oh, I have been thinking about this. The moment you become aware of that, that thought has stopped. So this is why it is very important to learn to meditate. That means through meditation, you are training yourself to become conscious instead of unconscious. So we should learn to think consciously. Now when you begin to, say, write a letter or maybe write something, maybe you write an article or you even make a speech or you talk to someone, at that moment you are conscious. But if you are just doing nothing and you just sit and wait, all kinds of thought comes into your mind, that is happening unconsciously. So this consciousness and unconsciousness are simply very important to understand the distinction between becoming conscious and becoming unconscious. And this whole teaching of the Buddha is nothing but training people to become conscious. And it is only when we begin to think and act consciously that we are practicing Buddhism. You can listen to the teachings of the Buddha or read about the teachings of the Buddha. But if you remain unconscious, that teaching is useless for you. So the important thing is to learn to be conscious. And it is only by becoming conscious that we can really practice and gain and profit from the practice. So, gaining control over emotions is a very simple thing. It is simply to become conscious. But of course, we have to train ourselves. Now, if you think of a baby, a small child who is not properly aware of what is happening in the world, that baby is unconscious. But as this child begins to grow up, the child begins to become conscious gradually. And when you become an adult, you are more conscious than the child. But still, even the adult, the normal adult, is not fully conscious. Most of the time, even the normal adult is unconscious. We are sleeping. The really fully conscious person is the person who becomes a Buddha or an Arahant. Arahant is a disciple of the Buddha who has become fully conscious. This is the meaning of the word Buddha. Buddha means one who has awakened. Awakened means become conscious. Become fully conscious. Otherwise, we are still going on like these, what are called robots. If we are living unconsciously, we are more robots than conscious beings. So it is very important to become conscious, and that is the meaning of Satipatthana, which is introspection, not just mindfulness. It is not just being mindful, it is to become aware of what is going on inside us rather than becoming aware of what is going on outside. And it is only by becoming aware of what is going on inside that we begin to understand that what is going on inside is also based on the same laws that govern what is going on outside. Now, what is going on outside? Today, we are gradually beginning to understand. You see, in ancient times, people didn't know how it rains. They thought that some supernatural beings, gods or devils, pouring water from the heaven or some place. But now people know, who at least the scientists began to understand, that what is really going on is that the water in the ocean and even on land evaporates and becomes clouds, and the clouds begin to cool down and then again drop down as rain. Ancient people didn't know that. They thought rain was coming because God is pouring water from the heaven. And when there was lightning and thunder, they thought God is angry or something like that. You see, but now people know that it is all done by electricity. Electricity in the clouds. So you see, people are beginning to know what is going on in the world, and they came to know a very important law. And that very important law that is used by scientists today in making all these machines, all the scientific technology, all the things produced by science, like the fan or the air conditioning or the airplanes, heaters, all that is based on this one principle. And that principle is what is called determinism. Determinism means that everything that happens in the world happens due to the presence of the necessary conditions. When those necessary conditions are present, it happens. When the conditions are absent, it doesn't happen. And this law was discovered by the Westerners today during the 16th and 17th centuries. That was the time when science began. But more than 2000 years before that, the Buddha discovered this. He called it the Paticca Samuppada, today translated as dependent origination. You see, but the Buddha used it for a different purpose. The Buddha didn't make machines out of that knowledge. It is in the West that people began to make these machines. Because the Westerners were more interested in changing the world, changing the circumstances. But the Buddha was interested in changing ourselves, changing the mind. And he saw that the mind is also working according to the same principle. And he made use of that. And that is how he became a Buddha. So becoming a Buddha is really a process of evolution of the human mind. Today all the problems in the world arise from this fact that the human being is not fully evolved. Although according to modern scientific thinking, the human being is the highest evolved animal, but still the human being is not the fully evolved state. The human being has to evolve further. And that evolution is through the process that the Buddha called the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. And it is through that process that the human being can evolve further and gain control over all the emotions. And become fully conscious beings. And a fully conscious being is not the normal human being. That is a supernormal state. And that supernormal state is what is called a Buddha. So a Buddha is not an ordinary human being. The Buddha was born as a human being, but rose above that state. And he became a supernormal being. This is why there was, during the time of the Buddha, a certain Brahmin. While the Buddha was walking along a road, those days there were no tarred roads, so it was all sand roads. So the footprints of the Buddha was seen on the road. And the person who came behind saw the footprints. And when he saw the footprints, he thought, this cannot be the footprints of a human being. It's different. So the Buddha was able to read his mind, because the Buddha was not a normal human being anymore. He has risen above that state. He had these psychic powers. So when he read the mind, he saw that this man was thinking who this person was. So what he did was, he walked out of the road and sat under a tree. Why he did that was to let this person come and speak to him. So this person came and asked, "Are you a Deva, a celestial being?" He said, "No, I am not a Deva." "Then are you a Yakka? You know what a Yakka is? Some other non-human being?" He said, "No." "Then are you a human being?" He said, "No, I am not a human being." "Then what are you?" He said, "Whatever, when present, a person can be called a Deva, those conditions are not present in me. Whatever, when present, a person can be called a Yakka, those conditions are not present in me. Whatever, a person, when present, can be called a human being, those conditions are not present in me." And he said, "Just as a lotus, though born in the water, grown up in the water, rises above the water and remains unsoiled by the water. In the same way, I have grown up in the world. I was born in the world, grown up in the world, and I have risen above the world, and I have transcended the state of the human being. I have gone even beyond the Devas and all the gods. So there is only one word that you can use to refer to me, and that is Buddha, which means one who has awakened, one who has become fully conscious." So you see, it's very important to understand that to evolve, that is the word that we can use today. Today, you know, the theory of evolution, which is a biological theory of the scientists. Now the people in the West, even in United States, there are people who claim, they are wanting the government to change even the education in schools so that They will be teaching about creation of the world. Some of these Christians, they don't like to hear about evolution. The theory of evolution has been going against the Christian religion. But when we think of Buddhism, the theory of evolution is not only accepted in Buddhism, it is the only way to explain the teachings of the Buddha. The teachings of the Buddha can be fully understood only when we begin to think of the evolution. Just as this is biological evolution, but we are now talking about a psychological evolution. It is the evolution of the human mind that made the Buddha a Buddha. So the whole teaching of the Buddha is a teaching about evolution, that the human being has to evolve, and it is during this process of evolution that the human being begins to free themselves from these emotions. Because that emotion was what the Buddha called the cause of all the sufferings in the world, which he, of course, the word that he used was tanha, and today translated as craving. It is not just craving, it is emotion. So it is by getting rid of this emotion that we can become real Buddhas. So I think I have been speaking long enough. So if you have any questions to ask, and if you have not understood anything, you can ask now so that I can try to answer. Well, the only meditation that the Buddha taught was what is called the Noble Eightfold Path. That is the meditation. It has 8 steps in the path, and you should study that and practice it, that's all. But it is all based on understanding the problem first. That is what is called sammaditthi, or usually translated as right view or right understanding or something like that. That is to understand the problem. If you don't understand the problem, you can't solve it. Just as a doctor, when you go to get some medicine for your sickness, the doctor will first examine you and try to understand what is wrong with you. Without understanding, he can't cure you that sickness. So the first thing is to understand, that is the right view. And then after that, you have to change your way of living. Turn in a different direction. If you are going north, you have to start going south. And that means not to be carried away by the emotions. That is the second step. Now, if you fall into the ocean and you are being carried away by the current, now you have to stop being carried away by the current and you have to start swimming. So that is what I call reorientation. Reorientation is changing the goal. Goal has to be changed. The goal orientation. And the goal is simply not to be carried away by emotions, but to stop being carried away by emotions. That means to stay calm. Calmness becomes your goal. And then from there on, the rest of your life begins to change. Your speech changes, your actions change, and your whole life begins to change. When the goal has been changed, your behavior, the whole life changes. And then, of course, then you make the right effort to free your mind of emotions. And then that means you have to change your focus. Instead of focusing on the external world, you have to focus on what is going on inside you. That is what I call introspection. And when that is done properly, gradually your mind gets fully purified, free from all the emotions, and you become aware of the realities of life in the form of anicca, dukkha and anatta. When you begin to understand that there is no self here, you are only thinking of a self. When you are fully aware of that, all your suffering comes to an end. That's how it goes.